He was called a tyrant, a madman, the villain of the American Revolution. Colonists burned him in effigy, cursed his name, and rebelled against his crown. But who was the real King George III? Was he the unhinged despot of American legend, or something more complicated? The man who ruled over Britain during one of the most turbulent periods in world history didn't just lose America, he changed it. And it changed him. This is the untold truth of King George III, the monarch who lost a continent and paid the price in more ways than one. George III didn't start out as a villain. When he took the throne in 1760 at just 22 years old, many in Britain saw him as a fresh hope. Young, principled, deeply religious, and devoted to his family, he was the first Hanoverian king to be born in England, and the first to speak English as his first language. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't a warrior king. He didn't gamble or chase women or party like his predecessors. He was earnest, almost too earnest. He read books on agriculture for fun. People called him Farmer George. But while the nickname was meant to mock, it hinted at something deeper. George was methodical. He believed in order, stability, and duty. And when he looked across the Atlantic at the American colonies, he didn't see rebels in the making. He saw British citizens who owed loyalty to their king. In his mind, their prosperity, their safety existed because of the crown. But there was a problem: money. The 7 Years' War, what Americans know as the French and Indian War, had just ended in 1763. It was a global conflict, and it had been expensive. Britain was drowning in debt. Parliament needed revenue, and it looked to the colonies. The logic was simple. Britain had protected the American colonies during the war. Now the colonies should help pay for it. So the taxes began. The Sugar Act, the Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts. And with every new tax came more protest. Americans weren't just upset about money, they were furious about power. They had no representatives in Parliament, yet laws were being passed across an ocean without their input. No taxation without representation. King George didn't invent the taxes, Parliament did. But in colonial minds, he became the face of them. The villain, the tyrant, the one pulling the strings. In reality, George III wasn't trying to punish the colonies. He just couldn't imagine a British subject refusing the authority of the crown. To him, this wasn't oppression. It was law. But the more the Americans pushed back, the more he doubled down. He sent troops to Boston. He backed Parliament's harsh measures. He refused to negotiate when colonists sent petitions. To George, rebellion wasn't something you reasoned with. It was something you crushed. And then, everything broke. In 1775, the battles of Lexington and Concord erupted. In 1776, the colonies declared independence. The Declaration of Independence, written largely by Thomas Jefferson, didn't just list grievances. It painted George III as a tyrant. He has abdicated government here. He has plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns. And for the first time in history, a colony tried to break free from an empire, permanently. George was stunned, furious, betrayed. He called the American patriots traitors. He vowed never to forgive them, and he launched the largest military campaign Britain had ever mounted in the Western Hemisphere. But it didn't go as planned. The war dragged on. British victories didn't crush the rebellion. Instead, they hardened it. In 1781, General Cornwallis surrendered at Yorktown. The American Revolution was over. Britain had lost its colonies, and George III had lost more than land. He'd lost control. Back home, the defeat shattered his reputation. His critics called him incompetent. Some mocked his stubbornness. Others blamed his ministers. He was still king, but he was wounded, and not just politically, because soon George III would face something even more devastating than war: his mind. In the years after the Revolution, the king began suffering mysterious, terrifying episodes. He'd talk for hours without stopping. He'd babble incoherently. His hands trembled. His eyes rolled. Doctors were baffled. Some thought it was madness. Others said it was a disease of the blood. Some now believe it was porphyria, a rare genetic condition. But whatever the cause, the effects were devastating. During one episode, George was strapped into a straitjacket. At one point, he shook hands with a tree, believing it was the King of Prussia. He was lucid for years at a time, but the attacks returned, worse each time. By 1810, his mind had deteriorated so much that his son was made Prince Regent, ruling in his place. George III lived, but not really. He spent his final decade blind, deaf, and mad, locked away at Windsor Castle. When he died in 1820, he was 81 years old. He had reigned for 60 years, but he hadn't truly ruled for the last 10. So why does King George III matter? Why should we care about the man who lost America? Because his story is not one of evil or madness or failure. It's a story of how power works, how empires collapse, how people, even kings, can become symbols of something far bigger than themselves. To Americans, he became a villain, a warning, proof that monarchy was oppressive by nature. To the British, he became a tragedy, a well-meaning king who watched an empire fracture and lost his mind in the process. But here's the twist. In his own country, over time, George III's reputation changed, not as a conqueror, but as a stabilizer. He presided over the defeat of Napoleon. He supported science, education, and the arts. He was a devoted husband, rare for monarchs of his era, and a doting father. His personal library became the foundation of the British Library. And in many ways, George III helped shape the modern British monarchy, not through power, but through example. Steady, domestic, dutiful. Farmer George, not warrior George. He never forgave the Americans, but America never fully forgot him either. Even today, his name sparks debate. Was he mad? Misunderstood? A monarch out of time? The truth is complicated, but it's worth remembering that revolutions don't happen in a vacuum. The American Revolution wasn't just about taxes or tea. It was about identity, power, voice. And in the eyes of the colonists, George III represented all the forces holding them back. So they broke free. And the man who ruled an empire, who believed in law, in order, in monarchy, watched it all fall apart. Not with a bang, but with a signature on a declaration. In the end, King George III didn't lose America because he was evil. He lost it because he couldn't imagine a world where his authority could be questioned and survive. But America questioned it, and the world changed. Forever.